incredibly excited to have Andrew Gelman join us on this next edition of our Behind the Scenes seminar series. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a behavioral economist at the University of Oxford. Vatsal is a development behavioral economist at Exeter. And yeah, we have the chance to have Andrew tell us a little bit about the behind the scenes of one of his projects. Andrew is going to talk about the project, and Vatsal is going to walk you through a little bit the logistics of the seminar. And then, yeah, we'll give it over to Andrew to share his experience.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining. So I'll just walk through the logistics of the seminar once with the audience. Seb, could you also please continue to add people? I think people are still joining. So as some of you might already know, so the way this works is different from the standard seminars, which is that we'll have Andrew give an introduction to the project for a few minutes. And then we're going to share the link to the survey with you to elicit your priors, your beliefs about the behind the scenes of this particular project. And then you'll have around 5 minutes or so. It's a very short survey. And then I'm gonna share my screen and show you your responses relative to what Andrew has already provided to us, information on behind the scenes. And then we're gonna get into a deeper discussion about the process behind this paper. I'm going to share a consent form with you on the chat. This is something that you would have seen already in my email. Just in case you haven't had a chance to browse through it, this would be the time before we share the link to the survey. All right, Andrew, over to you. Thank you.
Oh, well, it's a privilege to speak with you all. Always like to reach new audiences. Let me start by telling you a story about a medical experiment that I heard about several years ago. Someone was designing an experiment, and they hypothesized it was for a condition that was killing a lot of people at the time, and they hypothesized that their treatment would reduce the probability of death by 25 percentage points. And they had designed a study that was supposed to have 80% power. That is an 80% chance of achieving statistical significance if the true effect size was 25 percentage points. And they did the power calculation. And just as a favor to somebody, like they wanted me to run it by them, just have a statistician check before they submitted it. So I did the quick calculation. It's very easy. I think you need 126 people to have the 80% power. And so they had done that fine. And I said, you are powering the study for a 25 percentage point effect. What if the effect was only 10 percentage points? Would that be like important? And they said, yeah, that would still be great. Like if the effect were 1 percentage point, like of course you always want to save lives, but the situation was very fluid, and arguably a treatment that only reduced the death rate by 1 percentage point might not be worth pursuing, but 10% would be enough. So I said, well, then maybe you want 1,000 people in the study, because then you'll power it large enough so you could detect a 10 percentage point effect size. And they said, well, we don't think the effect size is 10 percentage points. I said, what do you mean? They said, well, we suspect it's 50 percentage points. We think this is going to be very effective, but we want to be conservative. And so we'll say 25%. That's where we're powering it. And then I said, okay, could it be zero? And they said, oh yeah, it could definitely be zero. That's why we're doing the experiment. We're open to the idea it could be zero. So I felt there seemed something wrong. Like it could be 25 percentage points, or it could be zero, but it could be 10, couldn't be 10. Like that didn't seem to make sense to me, but I couldn't put my finger on what didn't make sense. So I thought about it and I remembered my statistical training regarding potential outcomes, and I finally framed the problem as follows. Suppose there are 3 kinds of people in your study. Let's suppose that they're the people who are going to die no matter what, the people who would be saved by the treatment, and the people who would live no matter what. So for example, suppose 35% of the people would die no matter what. 25% of the people would be saved by the treatment, and 40% would live no matter what. That adds up to 100%. Well, the treatment could kill people too. We'll get back to that. But let's keep it simple for now. Um, a statement that the a statement that the treatment has a 25 percentage point effect is mathematically equivalent to in this framework to the statement that 25% of the people who enter the study are type B people. Suppose you're a type A person, if you're gonna die no matter what, a type B person if the treatment would cause you to live, and a type C person if you're gonna live no matter what. So the statement of the average treatment effect is identical to a statement, what percentage of people who are in your study are type B people. Now, once you look at that, you realize that if there's a treatment effect, it's consistent with all sorts of possible average treatment effects. For example, if you were fortunate enough, clever enough to design your study so only type B people are in it, you would see a 100% treatment effect. On the other hand, if you were to apply it to a population where almost nobody is dying, or almost nobody is living, then of course you could only see a small effect. So their statement, I mean, okay, if the effect is zero, that's another story. If it's zero for everybody, it's always zero. But mathematically, any non-zero effect can be any average treatment effect depending on who's in the study. Therefore, arguments about how large is theta, the average treatment effect, although they feel like biological arguments about the effectiveness of the treatment, arguably you can view them entirely as population arguments, arguments about who's in the study. And then, yes, if the effect could be 25 percentage points, it could definitely be could be 10 percentage points, because that would just mean that the study is not tailored so much to these particular people. Now, if I had an hour, I've used this example not to talk about Russian roulette, but to talk about experimental design and all sorts of things. So I'm not going to talk about that here, but there's a lot more to be said in that direction. Um, So why is this interesting to me? So first, there's a practical point that now I could understand. I had a good reason for my original inclination to say to this guy that you should power it to detect the effect you're interested in. Um, Second, I have a better understanding of the concept of average treatment effect. I had, for all these decades, kind of thought of the average treatment effect as this parameter theta floating around. I think we often do that as, that's like theta is the great whale that we're hunting, right, on our trip. But it's not a thing. The average treatment effect does not exist in some um, of course, we know that always in some way. The very term average treatment effect implies we're averaging, but it meant something different to me. The third is when I design studies or talk about designing studies, you need to hypothesize effect sizes. And I realized that when hypothesizing effect sizes, you have to make hypothesis about including varying effect sizes. It's somewhat of a paradox because you think, well, first you estimate the average, you hypothesize the average, second you hypothesize the variance. But no, actually the variation is central to defining the average in the first place. So that was new to me. Finally, well, it gave me insight into scientific practice and even the replication crisis. It gave me an insight into how it is that people overestimate treatment effects in their design. Um, Now, I mentioned this a while ago, some time ago giving a talk, because I love this example. And there was someone in the audience, Andrew Vickers, a statistician, who pointed out that there was a problem with my story. And I said, what was the problem? And because I thought the math was all right. And he said, well, you're assuming that the treatment effect for any person is deterministic. But what if you give somebody the treatment and it might save them or it might not, because it depends on how it reacts with their body. And I said, well, I learned about this when I was in graduate school. I took a class in causal inference in 1985 from Don Rubin, and the way he put it was, or maybe the way I put it is, imagine that you have to think that the great book of life has already been written and we just haven't read it. So the potential outcome is what will happen. And if the treatment seems random to you, randomness just represents your ignorance. That's just being Bayesian. So it's completely kosher mathematically to think of there being a deterministic treatment, a deterministic outcome for each person, even if you get there through what seems like a random process. And Vickers was like, well, that seems a little bit tortured as reasoning. And we kind of left it there, not as a disagreement, but say, well, you could mathematically express it as a random outcome or as a deterministic outcome. Um, I liked the deterministic outcome because there is a kind of purity to it. You just talk about potential outcomes and that's there. Although to Vickers, there was a kind of bit of a mathematical artifice to it. Um, so then to continue, a while later, I became aware of some work on decision analysis. The term that was used was prioritizing safety over efficacy. So the idea is you're trying a new treatment and our usual way ever since Norman and Morgenstern from 1948 or whatever it was, our usual approach is to look at the expected utility, maybe the expected length of life, life stave, qualities, expected monetary value, expected utility, whatever it is. And pick the one that's better. But of course, there's a long history in decision analysis of non-utility based decision rules, such as regret and things like that. I've always hated these things, by the way. I've kind of temperamentally, I've never liked the idea of using regret to make a decision. It seems to me that ultimately the decision should depend on the outcome, not the process by which you go through. These minimax rules, it's all sorts of things that I temperamentally just kind of hate. I'm more of a hardcore Bayesian in my feelings. But anyway, someone came by and was telling me about some recent work of utility functions like this. So you'd say, I have a new treatment, and instead of looking at the net lives saved, if we continue with that metric, we look at the proportion of people who are saved by the treatment and the proportion who are killed, and the negative utility from killing the people is higher than the positive utility from saving. So it's a little like trying to formalize your trolley problem. And you could imagine this arising not just in medicine, but even in business. Like even a company, you might think they only care about the bottom line, but maybe that's not true. So maybe you don't want to you don't want to gain 100 customers if you're going to lose 50, perhaps. Now, ultimately, that might apply to the bottom line. You might say, this is because it's a shortcut to a long-term thing. Similarly, with the medical treatment, you might say ultimately you should only care about utilitarianism, but if you start instituting treatments that are killing people, that bothers people more, and you have to respect people's intuitions. And long term, if you don't respect people's intuitions, we'll get, certain things like we see nowadays in the U.S. public health establishment with like, anti-science attitudes. So there is an argument for this kind of asymmetric decision rule. The way we put it in the title of our paper is it's a rule where the utility function depends on counterfactuals. And I think at first we were calling it an asymmetric decision rule, but that was a little misleading because then it could be that your utility function depends on, I can't remember exactly why, but I felt like the term asymmetric decision rule it also applied to the general sense where your utility is, there's an asymmetric utility function where the utility of a gain is not as high as the disutility of a loss. That's not what I'm talking about here. You know about that. I'm not talking about that. I'm specifically talking about where the utility depends on the potential outcome. It depends on what would have happened under the alternative. So not a mere asymmetric decision rule. So I abandoned that term to be more clear. So this example bothered me that as I said, I didn't like this prioritizing safety over efficiency. My intuition is I'd rather put that in the utility function in some way not having to do with the potential outcome. It annoyed me. So I thought about it and I was trying to understand it in a simple example. They had a certain hypothetical or maybe real medical example, which I'm not remembering. Um, and I finally came up with this example of Russian roulette. And so can I keep going or is it time for me to stop? Okay. So the Russian roulette example was that in Russian roulette, you get a gun, you put one, it has six chambers. I apologize. Like some people, like people who've involved in actual violence, you're not going to like this. But you can choose your own analogy if you want. Um, you put a single bullet in the gun and use the revolver and you spin it and then you shoot yourself and there's a 1/6 chance that you die and a 5/6 chance that you live and that's it. So consider that you're playing Russian roulette. That's the current treatment. Well, in this, obviously, you can think of it not as Russian roulette, but you have a medical condition with a 1/6 chance of killing you. But when you start talking about real things, it gets complicated. So Russian roulette is very clean. Now you're going to consider replacing this with an alternative treatment, and this is to play Russian roulette with a gun with 7 chambers in it. So now your chance is 1/7 of being killed. Undeniably better. If you have to choose one of these, you choose the one with 7. Okay. But if you work this out in terms of potential outcomes, you see, well, there's a 1/42nd chance that you would die under either treatment. There's a 6/42nd chance that you would die under the first treatment and live under the second. A 5/42nd chance that you would live under the first treatment and die under the second, and a 30/42nd chance you would live under either one. The chance that the treatment saves your life is 5/42, and the chance that the chance that the new treatment um, saves your life is 6/42. The chance that the new treatment kills you is 5/42. It's good. It's more likely to save your life. But if you work it out with the asymmetric with the utility function that depends on the counterfactuals, it turns out you have a negative utility from switching. Because although it's killing, well, under the utility function in which killing is twice as bad as saving a life, right? So the new treatment saves lives, but it doesn't save twice as many lives as it kills, so it would be violated. Now, no one's going to do that. So I thought, okay, this is a counterexample to the utility function. Now, but then it kind of gets, now I'm going to now finish up and say, stepping back, what does this all mean? Okay. So a few things. Okay. Most obviously, you can't universally use this utility function. That doesn't mean it's a bad idea, but there's a counterexample where this won't work. Okay. The next thing is, but what if I want to kind of save their thing? Say, how could it work? How could their utility function still work in the context of the Russian roulette game? Well, one way you can do that is to make the potential outcome stochastic. So instead of saying that the potential outcome is binary, you live or die, you actually say the outcome of the treatment is a probability of death. Well, in this case, you're purely spinning the thing. So then the treatment has a uniform effect of reducing your probability of death by 1/42. So you no longer have a problem. So I've rescued the counterfactual based utility function by allowing the utility function to be stochastic. So the first argument is argument number one is the first argument is if you really want this utility function, you need to move to stochastic potential outcomes. Otherwise, it's a weird utility function that says, well, you can't use it because it's Russian roulette rather than a disease, right? I mean, that would be kind of, it's not, it's not so great. Okay. The second thing we realized was this violates the stable unit treatment value assumption, which is something I learned back in that causal inference class in 1985 from Rubin. Now, the funny thing is, you've all heard of you causal inference nerds have all heard of the stable unit treatment value assumption. And I think we usually think about it as no interference between units. So there's like no spillover. That's the usual way you think about it. But there's another part of the stable unit treatment value assumption, which is no special versions of treatments, which means that the outcome has to be deterministic. So something I hadn't realized until writing this paper and with working on this paper with my collaborator, Jonas, is that stochastic potential outcomes violate the stable unit treatment value assumption. But that doesn't mean they're bad. The stable unit treatment value assumption is just an assumption. It's a mathematical model. And I think, so now I think even forgetting about this utility function, even if I don't use it, I still like stochastic potential outcomes because it makes sense to me to put that intermediate thing in the same way that in econometrics or statistics, we're not required to use reduced form models. The deterministic potential outcomes, or SUTVA, is a kind of reduced form model of the process. Reduced form models can be useful, but process models can be useful also, especially if you care about what's happening inside. And that's fine. I mean, it's not like nobody ever said that you had to make this assumption. Um, and so that was interesting to me too. If I kind of step back, and this is what I'm going to conclude with, is I took a kind of utility function, which I'm still not really a fan of, but I kind of used it as a lever to say, well, what if you're going to use it? What if people want it? What does that mean? And it gave me a lot more insight into causal inference more generally. So that's the research project, and then I can tell you the story of how it all happened.
Amazing, Andrew. Super, super interesting. And what I find also really fascinating is how your own training in terms of counterfactual reasoning really comes into the thought process of developing the project. So that's very, very interesting. So Vatsa is gonna share the survey with you. You're gonna have 5 minutes roughly to answer the questions, and then we're gonna go over them. You mentioned Jonas, so I wanted to ask you before we talk more about other aspects of the project about this collaboration with Jonas. Was it your PhD student? More generally, how do you think about forming collaborations?
So what happened with Jonas was there was a different project. I can't remember where. Oh yeah, it was a project which ended up kind of fizzling out. I mean, we didn't. It was there was a professor at the medical school who was doing a research project. Um, it had to do with a machine learner that was classifying uh, heart EKGs of the yeah the heart scans, and he had done a study using available data and found that this classifier worked really well. And then he was designing an experiment. He wanted to talk to a statistician about it. So I was talking with him, and it was interesting because I said, well, you already have the old data and it classifies everything fine. Why do you need to do a randomized experiment for it? And he said, well, if you think about which old data you're getting, there's potential selection bias. So it makes sense to do that. But he had a conjecture that the effect was going to be pretty large. And I knew this was going to take some work. It would be interesting. So I wanted to work with a PhD student on it. I talked with one of my colleagues who recommended a student. And so then I talked to you, who was Jonas. I talked to him. He got involved in the thing. So that we had many meetings, and there was a grant proposal. We haven't heard back from this guy, so I don't know what happened with that. It was interesting, but then every once in a while things come up, and there aren't that many people who are just like happen to be in my office or nearby. So one day, um, but you see, if I'm telling you this, I'm telling you like time. You already know it's recent, I guess, because it's with a PhD student. But anyway, sorry, I'm messing up your, breaking security on this. But anyway, when I was contacted about this other thing, I said, Jonas, are you interested in causal inference? And he said, yeah. He's actually working with two other faculty members on other causal inference problems. So I looped him in, and this was originally my idea. I wrote a draft, and then he found some issues, and there are some things we had to work out and try to understand. And so we ended up being collaborators on it. It's, of course, great to have a collaborator, partly because there are just things that are clear to me, but like they're not really clear. Like sometimes the notation's sloppy. So if you look carefully at the paper, like equations 1 and 2 look like pretty trivial, but you actually have to get the notation right. It's surprisingly kind of difficult. It's about the idea that why does the utility, because if you don't look at carefully, if you're not careful, you end up just doing reduced form on everything. So why is it that, like, if you do utilities based on the outcome, even if you have stochastic potential outcome, you still end up with this paradox. So it's important that you take the expectations at the right time. And so that's kind of part of the point, that if utilities depend on counterfactuals, which is correct, by the way, if you think about like in a substantive sense, that thinking about counterfactuals is like where you draw the line. So it's okay for me to say, like, what if I hadn't picked up the gun? But to say, what if what if the spin had gone differently? That's not really under my control, right? So there's this idea of decision analysis that some things are under your control and some things are not. And you can only put the decision point in some places and not others. So this is very interesting to me, like just thinking about how economists think about decision making, because we have two theories. We have decision theory and game theory. Decision theory is operations research, right? So in decision theory, you have your decisions and you're maximizing under uncertainty. So you get to decide. The rest of the world is acting not randomly, but you have a model for the rest of the world, a theory of mind, as it were. And you have a decision tree, and in your tree, you have what other people might be doing, what might be happening in the world, and there's uncertainty. In game theory, it's the same thing, but on the other side is trying to optimize. So then you get minimax. So it's my impression that decision theory, a lot of the practicalities of decision theory and operations research came from World War II when they were solving operations research problems. The funny thing is a lot of operations in World War II was, I mean, I wouldn't call it a game, but there were certainly enemies that were being strategic. But in a lot of these military problems, it seems like the most effective way, it's an effective way of solving problems and making decisions is not to think of it as a chess game in which the other side is optimizing based on what you do, but more as a kind of process where the other side, you don't know what they're going to do. And so you put probabilities on it. So if you're deciding where to deploy your troops or how many tanks to build or whatever, the correct answer depends on what the other side is going to do. But you're probably not going to frame that as a game theory problem. You're probably going to frame it as a decision theory problem. You're treating the other person as unknown. So what I'm getting at is even like whether to model something as stochastic or not is really a very deep aspect to the extent that economics is, among other things, a theory of decision making. It's actually super deep, this little Russian roulette thing. Although we don't get into that in this paper, it just that's the thing about the decision theory and game theory is just something that I thought of yesterday when in class, but I was thinking this is pretty important actually.
Yeah, thinking about the epistemics of the problem seems like a really important first step. I wanted to ask you maybe before we move to the survey results, and for those of you guys who haven't filled out the survey and still want to participate, you have a few more minutes. How do you think about collaborations in general? Are your collaborations more local? So you mentioned, people around you. Are they more global, going across institutions? How do you think about this? Is there a systematic approach that you follow, or is it just serendipity in a sense?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I think you just have to see what works out. And often like teaching classes is good because students like end up like collaboration can be asynchronous. If I write a book and then someone does something, that's collaboration also. There was a funny thing because there was a class I wanted to teach this semester. I was teaching a new class this semester, which I'm really interested in. It's a social science class. Anyway, it's another story. It's called Rationalizing the World: The Hopes and Disappointments of American Social Science from 1900 to the present. But then my usual class, we need someone else to teach, but no one was available to teach it. So I said, I'll teach it. And they were like, "Well, you'll teach it." Well, you don't have to teach. You're already teaching however many courses. do you want a course release for next year? And I said, no, it's just fun to teach. And I just thought it's funny because people will like advise lots of PhD students and they don't like think that they're doing that's a bad thing. But teaching an extra course somehow seems like no one wants to admit that they would want to do it. But a lot of collaborators can be former students or people who read my books. Um, I don't know. I don't have a systematic approach. I think I've been lucky to have a lot of good collaborators. I think that the interaction is of the collaboration is probably more important than the main effect. And what I mean by that is I think some people have the feeling. So first, I think Jonas is just great. I'm so lucky to be working with him. I just say, speaking in the abstract, I think some people feel that it's so important to find the best people in the world by some metric to collaborate with, because in some settings that's true. If you're going to do a mathematical, if you're in the 1800s and you're going to do a mathematical collaboration and you're going to be working either with Cauchy or some random mathematician from some university, well, you better work with Cauchy because he's the guy who's going to actually do real work and the other person doesn't know anything. But like, I don't really think that way. Like, the person who's the best in the world, they don't need to collaborate with me either. Like, what's important is progressing science. So, of course, it's fun to collaborate with the best people. What's most important in any collaboration is to get out more than you would get otherwise. And yeah, some collaborations are just annoying. Like some people you just don't really enjoy meeting. Like you're not looking forward to the meeting, the group meeting. You're hoping it's over already. So that social aspect, I think, is super important. Also, it's useful to collaborate with people with different backgrounds in various ways. So that's obviously you want to work with people who know stuff that you don't know.
Yeah, challenging ideas and maybe also working with people who disagree with you might be difficult,
Oh,
but
that's no
also
problem. No, everybody disagrees with me. I have no problem finding people who disagree.
amazing. Well, now we're ready to go over the behind the scenes of the project. So Vatsal is going to share his screen.
Yes. So can you see my screen, Sev and Andrew? Yeah. Okay. Amazing. So, Andrew, as I said, we are very flexible in how we do this. We can take a couple of questions, and you can, feel free to comment on the behind the scenes whenever you want. So the first question we asked the audience was, how many years you think it took you from conceiving the idea to getting it published? This is what the audience said, and your response was 1 year.
Yeah, I don't think that's what the audience said. I think you're using some sort of crappy software that's taking discrete data and making
Yes.
it. That's horrible. I think that a graph should contain the seeds of its own destruction. That is,
Yeah.
in a graph, the discreteness of the data should be apparent. And so obviously you can see that like somebody said 7 and it's doing that, but that's just like, I mean, I would say
Yes.
next
Yeah.
time make a histogram for God's sake.
Yeah, I think this is just the Mentimeter default, and I think we should
Yeah,
definitely,
it's terrible, yeah.
yeah. But so I have a question about this though. So
Mm.
the rest of the speakers we usually get, often the median has been 5 or 6 years. Now, is this a disciplinary difference between statistics and economics, or how does this compare with the rest of your projects?
It's okay. It's a few things. First, it is a disciplinary difference that economists seem to like to write one paper a year and workshop it and like go around and do that. And like statistician might write 20 papers a year and so like we don't have the same thing where you like go around and give 80 talks on the same thing. It's just this is not how we do it. Um, I think related to that is economists are all about the so-called top 5 journals. I don't have the patience for that sort of thing. And so like I'd rather just publish it anywhere and get it out. But it's not just me. I think that's statistics is more like that. The second is it's just kind of luck in that we wrote this paper. Actually, Biometrica would be considered a top 5 statistics journal. So we wrote this paper and like it's very clean and I don't know, like we thought, hey, let's submit it to this top journal. And then they liked it right away. I think we did have maybe 2 rounds of review, but like that it was even after the first, it was clear that it was fine. So, and then lots of people have been interested in this paper. Oh, I gave you my page. I think I just I showed you a post that was all the things that I'd published in the past year, and each one had a little story and asked you to pick, and you picked the Russian roulette. Um, but it's just, yeah, it happened that we've had a lot of interest in this paper. I just think it's like I've had some papers I love and no one cares about them, and this one just seemed to hit the right place at the right time, and everybody likes it. So, um,
Mhm.
in that sense, you could say there's some selection effect. You picked the paper, you found it interesting. Other people found this paper interesting enough to want to publish it immediately. If I had picked a paper at random from the set of 20 or whatever it was that I published last year, then it might have been a longer period.
Mhm. Okay. Also, just a reminder to the audience that you can feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions at any point. Okay,
People
again,
must love this. Everyone loves talking about themselves, right? I mean, doing this series, what a great idea. You just get people to open up. Everyone likes telling you their life story. Okay.
All right. Okay. The next question we asked you was, I apologize for the graph already. How many times did you present this paper? Um, you said you didn't present this paper at all. And I was wondering, one of the things that stood out to me while reading the paper was that you cite your blog post from 2021, I think, where you had the seeds of this idea. Do you also think of that as a venue where you get a lot of feedback already? And again, how does this compare in with
Oh,
the
okay. So
discipline in
let me
general? Yeah.
clarify. Oh, yeah. Okay. So just for the blog post was a post on this example, which was from COVID. I didn't tell you that because I didn't want to tell you the time of it. Um, that was from that was from 2020, and that was about the example where there's a certain percent who live, a certain percent who die, and a certain percent who would be saved by the treatment. So if you start that as the beginning. If you define that as the project, I've spoken many times about it. I mean, I don't think I've ever given a dedicated talk on it, but I've probably spoken on it more than 10 times.
Mhm.
Um, the Russian roulette is the thing that's a year old. That's because Amanda Kowalski came by my office or called me. I can't remember if I met her physically or maybe it was just Zoom. She's at the University of Michigan, but she shared this idea, this relatively new idea of hers with collaborators. Um, then I was able to build upon my earlier insights that I'd had from that COVID example. So I've never spoken about the Russian roulette before, but the talk I gave, one reason the talk I gave was so polished was because the first half of it was material I've talked about before. So maybe that helps. I've been invited to speak on the Russian roulette, although it's some faraway meeting I'm not going to go to, so Jonas will speak on it. But so fair enough to the audience that there are parts of this that are a few years old.
Mhm. Okay, let's go to the next question. I think we have a few questions on peer review now. So how many journals do you think the researcher submitted to before the paper was accepted? And here you said one. We can take all the questions on peer review
Well,
and then
wait,
maybe
or
you can.
zero. Well, you said before it was accepted. I don't know. How could it be zero if it's been accepted? You mean previous journals? I think
Previous
this is
journals,
the
yeah.
only journal we sent it to.
Okay, okay.
So maybe that
Um,
counts as zero for you. I sent it to colleagues who like, it was fine. We sent to a bunch of colleagues. I submitted it right away and then sent to some colleagues. And one colleague said, oh, we should submit it to this certain econ journal. It was the top 5 econ journal. And I was like, oh, wow, that would be fun to publish. It's kind of going to be a pain in the butt, but then meanwhile, this other journal accepted it. Then I sent it to someone else who I had cited, and he said, oh, we like this paper. You might want to cite our paper, blah, blah, blah. We had cited it. I really admire this guy. Can you imagine somebody who read a paper, liked it, and didn't even check the references to see if he had been cited? That I really admired that. Like whenever someone sends me a paper, I always check to see if they cite me. Like just I'm just curious, it just was funny. Okay, so yeah, zero journals then before.
Right. Okay. And was this the first choice? Like, how did you decide where to submit the
I
paper?
just seemed like a good this journal Biometrica, they kind of like short, clean papers. And it's not I mean, it doesn't have a mathematical theorem, but that's just because I don't like writing things that way. That we could have written like a theorem, like theorem, it is not possible to blah 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 without blah blah blah. And maybe I would have made the paper better. It's not my style. But anyway, it's I'm kind of still I have to admit like it's like, oh yeah, let's publish in a top journal if we can. It's kind of silly. I guess it's probably good for my co-author as a student to be publishing in a top journal. Like, it doesn't anyway, so we just submitted it there because it seemed like a good journal for it. Like it fit their culture. It's a very old-fashioned reason, I guess, is for choosing a journal.
Okay. Um, then we asked the audience about the rounds of revisions that the paper went through, and you said one revision.
Yeah, it might have
Uh,
been two. I mean, there was one serious one where they had a bunch of comments and we changed it around, and then probably one more where we had to do a little bit more, but the second one was just not a big deal.
right.
We
Okay.
had only there was only a small after the first revision. We were pretty confident that it would eventually be published. It took a bit of work.
Mhm. And then how many months it took you to address the comments of the referees was also one. I think across all the questions here, the audience has been overestimating a lot of
Well,
them
again,
with these
selection bias.
questions. Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
remember, but
Yeah.
like once you're gonna, Jonas and I see each other every week anyway. So, once you're gonna revise it, you might as well just do it, right? Like this was not that difficult. Um, we had to rethink a few things, but like just it was mostly how to frame things. I think we cleaned up the notation. We took out, I think we had we had some other example that we took out. I don't remember the details exactly, but it wasn't so hard. I think the section on connecting, we simplified the presentation in a useful way in terms of the utility function, and then I think we added more to the final sections about examples and how this would apply in other settings, which was probably a good thing.
Mhm. Um, so does anybody have any questions about the peer review side of things?
What is the paper that took you the longest to publish?
Oh, well, that's a survival analysis problem, right? Because I have papers here. I can go here. Let's see. Here, you want me to, let's
Mhm.
do a screen share here. Can I do screen share? You have that
Yeah.
here. Share
Yeah.
screen options. Um, no, I don't want screen options. Let's do this again. Screen share. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, this is probably too small. Can you read this? Okay.
Yes.
I have a web page with like published papers, and then I have a web page with my unpublished papers. So there's a lot. They don't have years. So I guess we could go to the bottom. This one, Moderation, the Pursuit of Moderation is No Vice. This is from 2008. We just never finished it. So maybe that doesn't count because it wasn't submitted. Um, this was a paper from around 2007 or 2000. It was 2000. No, this was like 2006. I mean, these were kind of things that we didn't get around to submitting just because they were like interesting, but I guess we just didn't bother pursuing them. Sometimes I like them though. I kept them on the webpage because I like them all. This paper with Guido, this was from 2013. This one we did submit to a journal in Econ Journal. I really like this paper actually. It's one of my favorites. And we submitted it, I think, to maybe it was a statistics journal and Econ Journal, and then they had some issues with it, and it just didn't feel like revising. It's like, I just didn't have the energy. Neither of us had the energy to do it. So I stuck it in a book that I wrote, although it's in like section 23.9 of the book. So probably nobody read it on the book anyway. The Garden of Forking Paths, this one got published, but annoyingly enough, we published it for a journal. It's actually a magazine called American Scientist. And they didn't like the title because they thought it was too obscure. So we changed the title to The Statistical Crisis in Science. And who wants to refer to this? So everyone actually refers to our preprint. So in that sense, it did get published. This one was around 2000, I guess, 14. A journal asked me to review this book. And then there's some weird thing. I think that they either tried to make me pay for publishing it, which was like ridiculous, or they like edited the review that I wrote and like, well, this was before AI slop. It was so a human turned it into human slop, and I got really mad and I said, you can't do that. Like a journal, you can't rewrite my paper. And then they were like, well, the hell with you. So I just kept it on the web page. Um, this one, I can't even remember what happened with this. This was an adjunct to a paper that we wrote, and so we did never. I don't think we ever tried to submit this. Maybe we should have. This one also. I think we might have tried to submit and gave up. This one. What is this? Oh, this one was published, so it shouldn't be in the unpublished thing anymore. So I don't know why it's there. This was a silly joke article that my my colleague and my friend and I published. I once wrote a joke article on zombies, and I put it on archive, which they wouldn't let me do it first, but they let me do it on Halloween. And that was unpublished. I'm not going to submit it to a real journal. I actually had some statistics content. It was kind of like some survey sampling ideas applied to zombies. A lot of jokes. I highly recommend it. Anyway, one day I found out that it had been included in a reader for college students, like that has different types of writing. And they used this as an example of academic writing. So that became published. Okay, I won't go through all of these to say, but like typically what happens is these are things. Oh, this was a paper which my co-authors and I we got into a big fight. The paper had mistakes, so we couldn't handle the review comments, so it never got published. Um, some of these are things that are eventually been submitted if you go up. Some of them are old versions of papers, like the causal quartets. We published a paper that was shorter than this, so I kept the longer one. Then when you kind of go up here, the top like 10 or 15 of these, I guess the top 10 or 15 are papers that we have submitted and they're just in the review process. And some of them are definitely going to be published and like so forth. Those are pretty recent. So actually, if I think of my publisher, the longest publication I believe was okay. This paper, Methodology as Ideology. Well, I like the title. I like the content. It's a kind of shooting down this evolution of part of a chapter in this evolution of cooperation book, which like I have big problems with evolution of cooperation book. I'll talk to you about later if you want. Anyway, this was based on my undergraduate thesis, which was 1986. So, but I didn't submit it to a journal then. My undergraduate advisor didn't tell me to submit to a journal, so I didn't. What happened was sometime around maybe 1998, so I guess around 10 years after I was talking to a political science professor about it, and he said, "Oh, well, you might as well submit it to a journal." So I submitted it to a political science journal, and they just raked me over the coals for like not knowing the literature and I don't know the literature on international relations and stuff like that or game theory. I don't know any of this literature. So that was that. I stuck it in a book that was editing. So it became a book chapter. And then I posted something on the blog about it. And then I got an email from some guy saying, "Hey, I'm the editor of this journal and this looks interesting. Submit it to our journal." So I submitted to our journal and then they published it. So the time between submission to initial submission to anywhere and publication was about 10 years, which might be oh, that's not the longest. I had another paper, what was it? Yeah, this one, Visualizing Distributions of Covariance. This was a research project originally from, I think, 2008. And then we submitted to a journal and they didn't like it. And it was just, we just didn't follow up on it. And then I was contacted by a journal and said, could you submit a paper to our journal? Like it's a special issue for this guy. He'd really appreciate it if you submitted paper. So I was like, sure, why not? It's one of those predatory journals, like, but I was like, they're like, oh, this guy would really appreciate it. So I looked for old papers and I found this old paper that was never going to get published. I submitted that and they're like, fine, we accept. Of course they accept it. They're a predatory journal. They accept everything. I made sure I wasn't going to have to pay, right? So I did that. And then I sent an email to my co-authors, and one of my co-authors said, we're not publishing in a predatory journal. This is terrible. So I sent an email to the journal saying, sorry, I can't do this. I sent them another old paper instead that they published. But then I said, well, hey, let's publish it. So we revised it and we found this journal. I have a hobby. I like to publish in journals I've never published before. And so I found this journal and it's good. I like this paper. I don't know how many people read it, but I think it's actually really nice. So there, I think that was more like 18 years or 16 or 17 years between initial submission anywhere and final publication. So that might be my personal record.
All right. Okay. I think we have like around 5 minutes left. We'll do one more question and then we can open it up to the audience.
Guess it took too long to answer that one. Sorry.
That was really helpful. So the another question we asked you, Andrew, was how much time was spent on each of these activities on this particular paper that you presented. And these are the audience's averages.
Well, obviously, some people in the audience didn't read the paper because there's no data collection and no data analysis. So you didn't read the paper and you were just winging it. Have you ever heard of like adding noise to the survey? Like if you don't know, there are public opinion surveys, and if you don't have an opinion, you should still answer because that's an opinion too. But a sort of something like this, you should have just not responded, I would say. It's okay to come to the talk. The talk's fine. You don't need to read the paper. But like, I mean, I guess it's fine. You could say this is some sort of prior. Maybe you should have also asked people, did you read the paper? So then they would have, I don't know. It's hilarious. Yeah, data analysis. Yeah, I spent 9% of my time I spent 20% of my time doing something that's not in the paper at all. Sure.
But what the audience is quite right on is like your response was 30% of your time developing the research idea, which the audience on average said 27.
Yeah.
I think we can stop here, and I think we've just open it up to the audience to ask you any questions.
I will say one thing, which is probably relevant to your point, that if we really spent 10% of our time navigating peer review, that's kind of an indictment of the system, given that this was one of the easiest peer reviews I've ever had, and it still took 10%. To be fair, in this case, it was ideal in that navigating peer review was not about dealing with a bunch of stupid comments. It was about actually making the paper better. So it was a plus, not a set of arbitrary hoops.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any questions?
I have a question. Thanks so much, Andrew. I enjoyed the paper. I did know there was no data in it, so at least I read that far. There's a couple things that really resonate with me across both sides of the divide, like econometrics and statistics. And, whenever I have to referee for a stats journal, I'm like, wow, this is a totally different world. Things move in an expeditious fashion, and you're not supposed to ask for a million things. So
the stakes are lower.
That's true. One of the questions I was going to ask you, you have so many projects going on at once. I mean, I don't think that I could even keep track of 20 papers at the same time. So how do you do that? And what is the rate of papers that vanish altogether and never even make it into the graveyard on your website?
Well, I do have another page which is unwritten papers, and so those are things that I haven't got to yet. Oh, yeah, I hate to say it. There are some things that are like projects where I've really just given up, but I don't like to talk about that. I I find it, I'm not that well organized. I think once someone said I should hire a personal assistant, which maybe I should have, or maybe still should. So with journal articles, sometimes I forget, like there'll be a journal, like there's some Columbia University had some problem with the email. So the system that most journals use when they send me emails, they get eaten up. They don't reach me. They don't even hit the spam filter. So sometimes I'll forget about a paper and it turns out it was accepted or rejected a couple of years earlier. Or I'll have to bug a journal and say, "Can you tell me what's up?" And they'll say, "Oh yeah, we already rejected it or we accepted it 5 months ago. We wondered why we hadn't heard from you." Like, it's kind of annoying. I guess I should just write these things down, but I just never get around to it. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's so strange. Like, why do I care about getting stuff published? Like, nobody reads journals anyway. You stick it in an archive or on the blog, and more people will read it than in the journal anyway. It seems like it matters to be in the journal, though. Um, I don't have a good answer. I don't feel that. I'm just kind of doing stuff.
Any more questions for Andrew? It's amazing that you were already, talking so much about the behind the scenes of your research. And how do we inspire other researchers to do that?
I don't know. I mean, it's funny because once I was once involved with an American Statistical Association project, and I had this idea I like stories. So I thought we're going to solicit stories. We'll just send out a general thing. I put a note on the blog, and we email people like send us your statistic stories, and once we have 365 of them, we'll post one a day for a year. I think I got about 15. Now, out of those 15, I think 10 were good. Like five of them were just really bad. But I don't know, like people don't like to tell stories so much, I guess. I think that I enjoy it, but it was funny. If someone had asked me, I would have taken the opportunity. But then it's also funny. I had a friend in college who was editor of the school newspaper, and I knew that he was my friend. And this was MIT. Like anybody could write for a school newspaper if they wanted to. It wasn't a school it wasn't a university with a journalism school or anything like that. It was not at all competitive. And so I could have reviewed movies for the school paper. I could have got free movie tickets, taking a date to the movie, the whole thing. And I never even thought of it. And I like to write. I like movies. I like to tell stories. So I think people just aren't in the habit. And asking them isn't enough. Like it's not, it's like, I guess there has to be, you have to start doing it somehow. So I don't know the answer. Like let me put it this way. Sometimes I draw, like I was at the museum and I sat and drew I sat in front of a painting and drew it. I'm a really bad artist. Like I can't draw anything. And I still got a lot out of drawing. Like I could just, my struggles, I understood that painting a lot more trying to draw it. I should do it more, but it's kind of work. I'm not good at it. And it's not something I'm in the habit of. So I just don't, even though when I do it, I feel better and I enjoy it. So I think, and maybe that's like that sometimes with exercise. I think that's like that maybe with people with telling stories that they don't think they can. I don't know. And I don't know if my experience will be inspiring other people to do it. They might just think that's something that he does. I don't know.
Well, on this note, thank you so much, Andrew, for sharing this hour with us. It was super interesting to hear your work. And yeah, thanks so much for your time. And I hope that more people in the audience will want to read the paper after hearing the behind the scenes.
Great. Well, that actually went better than I thought. Like I now I wish like I told more people about this. But do you have like, is there going to be like a YouTube of it? And then, we could
Yes,
do
absolutely.
that. I have to say, the YouTube's never as good as live. I don't know why that is. Like, it's the same. It's like watching a sporting event on tape delay. It's like being there. It's so much more exciting than watching the video. Yeah, I don't understand it. But anyway, I kind of wish there had been like 100 people seeing this because I feel like it came out well. So thanks for organizing. Obviously, you did something right. So I appreciate
Amazing.
that.